Next, I'd like to call on John Deere, who's an internationally recognized voice for peace and nonviolence. Can you hear? He's a priest, pastor, retreat leader. He's an author of 35 books on nonviolence and nonviolent peacemaking. He's a former director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He's been arrested more than 75 times for nonviolent civil disobedience. He's been nominated a number of times for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's a staff member of Campaign Nonviolence, which has groups working all across this country for nonviolence and end to injustice and destroying the environment.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out here. And I first want to just give my great thanks to David and David Swanson, wherever you are, and World Beyond War. How about another round of applause for bringing us all together? It's a great accomplishment. Thank you so much. And everything that I would have to say in my little 2 points here is just a few footnote points to the great speech we just heard. And I want to thank, and let's all join me in thanking again, Michael McPherson and Veterans for Peace. That was great, Michael. Thank you. So these are just some points. So I have, for my little 2 cents, I count 7. So buckle your seatbelts. Moving from a culture of war to a culture of peace, right, David? Yes. Okay. Number 1. This is just what I was thinking about, and you've been speaking and reflecting all day. But if Gandhi were here, he'd say, "Well, why? We don't deserve it." And he scandalized the entire independence movement in India for decades, saying, "Why should the British give us independence? Until we act like we deserve independence, then we can get independence." So the first step is starting to live and act like you are in a culture of peace and justice and nonviolence. What do you think of that? I think that's a very profound truth. That's everything Michael was saying. That's why I'm just giving you a footnote here. I think about that a lot. How can we act as if we are already in what we want? And that has to mean a radical change in every aspect of life, personally, communally, nationally, globally. We're living now, from this moment on, in the culture of peace and nonviolence. I could start getting biblical on you and spiritual and Catholic, and nobody wants that. No, I'm just kidding you. Jesus would say, the reign of God is at hand. We're living in that. Thich Nhat Hanh would say, you're already living in the pure land. And we're just unpacking, Michael, the social, economic, and political implications of this. And so I'm very challenged by Gandhi's comment. And I think it applies to us in the United States. And Michael unpacked it better than me. But I find that a starting point. Second, therefore, like Michael said, we non-cooperate with every aspect of this culture of war and violence and injustice. We non-cooperate. We do not support the military or injustice or racism or go through the list. We don't send our kids to war. We don't pay for war. We don't go to war. We don't vote for war. We don't teach war. We don't promote war. We don't justify war. We don't believe in the God of war. We don't support the churches and the false religions of war. And all the other implications of violence, and of course I'm talking about racism, sexism, greed, destruction of the earth. We resist the culture of violence and war, including through nonviolent civil disobedience as a last resort. But it's a lifelong resistance. And that's what my friend and teacher who just died, Daniel Berrigan, taught me my whole life. The great poet, Edna St. Vincent Millay, one of our teachers, in that first sentence of the greatest poem. I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. That is our mantra. And we're talking about death and the metaphors and the means of death as a social methodology. That's what Michael just told us. If we want to be part of a culture of peace and a culture of nonviolence, we are non-cooperating with death. and all of its metaphors and means and implications and systems. Number 3, we practice nonviolence. We have to go deeper than Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Dorothy Day. We have to go beyond them now. Nonviolence to ourselves. Meticulous interpersonal nonviolence toward every human being on the earth. Nonviolence toward every creature. Nonviolence toward Mother Earth. Go deep in it and make the connections. And reclaim our humanity as nonviolent beings. Our spirituality as people of nonviolence in a universe created going toward nonviolence, toward a God of peace and nonviolence, toward peace as a spiritual truth and reality. Number 4, well, I know on that point I'm trying to say what I always think I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh. We are talking about practicing personally the peace we seek politically in our lives and expanding that to communities, nations, and governments. I'm trying to unpack this topic, moving from a culture of war to a culture of peace. Number 4, we organize and support global grassroots movements of peace and nonviolence for a culture of peace and nonviolence. I heard Michael say this too, and our friend Martin. I'm a big name dropper to Martin Luther King Jr. We are not powerless. And the culture of war tells us there's nothing you can do. You can't make a difference. You're powerless. Who the heck do you think you are? And we go right along with us, even us as activists and movement people. Baloney. We have a power. I'm talking and quoting, like Dr. King said, the power of nonviolence to change the world if we dare wield it as a weapon. We have yet to begun to do that, to go beyond Martin and the movement. We can. If we take our teacher and our prophet seriously, Dr. King. The only way changes happen through history is bottom-up grassroots movements. Jesus was a nonviolent movement organizer. They have to kill him. To Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi and Dorothy Day. This is what we are about. Well, how are you doing with that? As movement builders. We have to be movement builders. And Michael just explained it. The world is moving. We never in history have had the opportunity we have at this moment. 85 nonviolent revolutions the last 30 years. 2/3 at least of the human race documented now as part of the grassroots movements for justice and peace. It never happened before. The New York Times saying on that day, Michael, remember? February 16th, the next day, we now have a second superpower on the planet. That's us, the movement. There's only being part of the movement now in this dark and difficult hour and so forth. But that means, as we've just heard, we have to connect the dots. It's a culture of death, violence. We can talk, these are words to talk about something we've never experienced before, from race into the total destruction of the earth and nuclear weapons. My group, Campaign Nonviolence, one of our projects we've launched is a week of actions around International Peace Day. This is the 3rd week. This week, we have, as of an hour ago, 758 demonstrations, actions, and events happening across the country in all 50 states. What do you think of that? That's pretty good. We want to have 1,000 next year. Go to our website, campaignonviolence.org. They're all documented. I've never seen this in my life. But what's different is we asked everybody to take the streets against everything. Racism, mass incarceration, poverty, the police killings, to the schools and healthcare and the hunger I see in New Mexico where I live, to war and drones, to nuclear weapons and executions and torture and catastrophic climate change and corporate greed. We're connecting the dots. And also at the same time upholding the vision of a culture of peace and nonviolence. Doing both. We simply cannot get the media to interested in this at all. We are really working hard on it. But the movement is responding. And that's what I'm saying. Be part of the movements. Build movements till the day we die. This was our hope. Because we have a power. I was with Cesar Chavez of the United Farm Workers shortly before he died. We stayed up all night. And I said to him, if I'm ever with people and they say, what should we do, John? What should I say, Cesar? And he said, tell everybody for the rest of your life, which I have done, I promised him. Like this, he went. Public action, public action, public action. tell everybody they have to engage in some public action for justice, disarmament, and peace. What do you think of that, Michael? All right. Number 5, one of our programs we've launched is, I got invited to speak in Carbondale, Illinois. And the groups there kind of just came together and said, this isn't working, so we've launched Nonviolent Carbondale. And I said, excuse me? And the longtime activists on all different issues came together and started having their meetings just before the city council meeting. This was years ago. And then they started meeting with the police department. Then they were in inner cities where the worst violent blocks. Then they were in the schools. Then they were in the healthcare. Then their libraries. And what they did was they lifted up a vision of how their city could become a culture of peace and nonviolence. Now, there's the Cities for Peace movement. Karen Armstrong's launching Compassionate Cities movement. So Campaign Nonviolence, we've launched the Nonviolent Cities Project. We have 35 cities in the United States working on this, reclaiming their city as how can it be a culture of peace and nonviolence. I think that's an organizing tool that others can use, and I invite you to consider this, and you can go to our website and find that there too, campaignonviolence.org. 6 o'clock, number 6, you're not going this is also difficult. Religion. I'm sorry to bring it up, but I'm convinced, of having met tens of thousands of religious-based activists around the world, that every religion on the planet is rooted in nonviolence. We have to help all the religious communities in the United States and around the world reclaim their core fundamental truth of nonviolence, which means love, compassion, and peace. No killing. There is no cause, however noble, no matter what anyone ever says to us for the rest of our lives, for which we will support the taking of a single human life. One life. That's a religious principle. Please help that to happen, religions to reclaim their nonviolence. And this year, what I have been working with, which has been a setback for me, is the Vatican. And I don't know if you've been hearing what's happened. Some of us were invited to Rome to meet for a week with the Vatican officials under the invitation of Pope Francis. And we've been continually shocked. We're continuing to work with the Vatican regularly. 3 weeks ago it was announced through our work that the Pope is issuing a statement on January 1st for the first time since the Sermon on the Mount on nonviolence. But we have asked him to write a formal encyclical like he did on the earth. And we are getting an audience and hearing on this, and movement is happening. This is hopeful. And he's going to, if we can get this to happen, we'll call the world to this vision of a culture of peace and nonviolence. If that happens, and certainly with the January statement, use it. People like Pope Francis right now around the world, and it's a very mainstream way to help us get this vision of a culture of peace and nonviolence into the mainstream. And so this brings me to my last point, number 7. I think, Harvey, wherever you went, one of the casualties of the culture of peace, the culture of war, a casualty of a culture of violence that we're facing is the loss of the imagination, which is at the heart of this topic that you've asked me to say a word on. You can no longer imagine that peace is possible, as Michael said. You ask anybody, can we have a world without war, a world without racism, a world without nuclear weapons? No, no, no. Our job, as Michael said, is to be visionaries of peace and nonviolence and help people to reclaim the imagination for peace and nonviolence. That's what our elders did throughout their lives. And the ones I'm talking about, the movements, because movements are the only way. And the ones I study are the abolitionists. Now, these people are just wacky. They're fantastic. They come along, and this is my imitation of Frederick Douglass or William Lloyd Garrison. Today, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. The people, you can hardly say it with straight. Are you crazy? There've always been slavery. It's in the Bible. Some people aren't people. He said, no. A new world is coming. A new world of equality. And they reclaim the public imagination of what it means to be a human being. And that was the breakthrough that led to the movement. We have to stand on their shoulders. Our job is even harder. And we're going to stand on the shoulders of Dr. King, and that's what we're doing this weekend. And we're saying, excuse me, America. Today in Washington, D.C. at American University, we are announcing the abolition of war. End racism and poverty and greed and sexism and torture and executions and nuclear weapons and catastrophic climate change and every aspect of this evil system of violence. And they're going to say to no, you're crazy, and we're going to say no. A new world is coming. A new world of nonviolence. That's what Dr. King did. I have a dream. We have to be those visionaries of peace and nonviolence too. And then we can build a movement as people reclaim their sanity and their sight from the blindness that leads to killing. And we can become people worthy of a culture of peace and nonviolence. Thank you.